Morning. This is a really difficult passage. It is pretty much Jungle Book in the middle of the Bible. We have 4 beasts, we have the Ancient of Days, and then we have a man. You couldn't get any more of a mix than that. Daniel chapter 7 marks a key point in the book of Daniel. Why is it a key point? It's because there's a few reasons. So Daniel chapter 7, it's the last chapter that is written in Aramaic. So from chapter 1 to more or less the beginning of chapter 2, it's written in Hebrew. But then from chapters 2 to chapter 7, it's written in Aramaic, which is pretty much Daniel's international language of the day. And this was meant to kind of let everyone understand what Daniel was writing. But this is the very last chapter. All the chapters here on out are written in Hebrew again. The second, it marks the shift in how this book has been written. Up until now, it's been a book about the history of the Babylonian kingdom with a dash of prophecy. But chapter 7 marks a whole new division in the book, where it's pretty much prophecy here on out with a dash of history. Thirdly, this is the first time we see Daniel having a vision. Up until now, we've seen Daniel interpreting the visions of other people, but this is the first time we see Daniel being the one getting the vision and needing some interpretation, as we've read. And also, we see a bit of a flashback. We read in the first verse, in the first year of King Belshazzar. Who remembers what my last sermon was about in Daniel? Daniel chapter 5. The writing on the wall, thank you. It was actually about King Belshazzar. Guess what? This chapter, chapter 7 and chapter 8, actually happened between chapters 4 and 5. So we think that this is around 553 BC, which is a whole 14 years before the feast that Belshazzar was having. Daniel would have been around 67 years old at the time he gets this vision. And you may ask yourself, why is it that this book is not in chronological order? Why is it not in chronological order? Why is it that we're going back and forth? And some people, some liberal scholars and some liberal commentators will say that this is why you couldn't trust the Bible, because it's just all over the place. But you're forgetting about the fact that storytelling back then was totally different from storytelling right now. And even if you look at right now, you still have movies where you have a little bit of a bird's eye view and then you have a flashback which focuses intently on the events of a particular passage. You just look at creation story itself and you see that it begins. I may need to use the other, because this is going a bit crazy.
What is it?
Technology? You can't always trust it. So I should know I work with it every day. So if we look at movies nowadays, movies do the same thing. Just as a side note here, how old is Daniel? He's in his late 60s. When he talks to Belshazzar, is already in his 80s. As one commentator said, this would be good to remind us that retirement doesn't mean you do nothing for God and that God doesn't choose you anymore. You need to start thinking about your retirement instead of it's time to do nothing, and put in practice the fact that you've got a few more hours available to do more for God, and to believe that God can and will use you for His glory. That was just a little bit of an aside. In verse 2 we see, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. As Daniel gets into this, it says, behold. The word behold, in the Aramaic, it means to look, to see, to pay attention. Even in the Old English, I found out that it means beholden, which means be thoroughly holden, to look or to hold. That means to thoroughly hold what he's about to see. And he's basically trying to tell you, pay attention to what I'm about to say. We look at the fact that it says that there's four winds. As some commentator says, it's four winds from all the four ends of the compass, coming into the great sea. The ESV Archaeological Study Bible says this was a common descriptor of the Mediterranean Sea, a large, frightening body of water to ancient Near Eastern people. In their literature, the sea symbolized chaos of nations rebelling against God. Or other people interpret this in light of Revelation 17:15, that says that the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are the peoples of the earth and all nations and all languages. Whatever way you're going to try and interpret this, it means that there were times ahead of troublesome times and tribulation for the people in Daniel's time. And now we get into the fun part of the book. We get four beasts. We get into Jungle Book time. God goes into Jungle Book time for us. And this is where people go crazy, because these beasts. But actually, God doesn't leave you thinking of, what are these beasts? Because He tells you exactly what these beasts represent in verse 17. It says these four beasts are four kings that shall arise out of the earth. He doesn't leave it open for interpretation. He tells you right out of the gate exactly what they are. There are four kings coming out of the earth. The very first beast is a lion with eagle's wings. The lion is the king of the beasts. And in many ways, the eagle is many times said that it's the king of the birds. So in this way, you have this really majestic creature, a king of the beasts and the king of the birds put into one, making this lion swift and powerful. It's a fitting image for Babylon. See, Daniel himself tells Nebuchadnezzar that he is the King of Kings in Daniel 2, verse 37. In Jeremiah 4:7, God uses the metaphor for Babylon and saying, a lion has gone up from its thicket, a destroyer of nation has set out. God uses lion to describe Babylon. He then goes on in Ezekiel 17:13 to say, a great eagle with great wings and long pinions, rich in plumage and many colors, came from Lebanon and took top of the cedar. He then says in verse 12 of that same chapter that this is Babylon. So God has used before these analogies, these metaphors of a lion and an eagle for Babylon. So here is a prophecy to Daniel in his vision saying this first beast is a lion, which is basically Babylon. We see the wings being plucked off, which kind of will remind you of the humbling of King Nebuchadnezzar, that God caused him to be humbled when he lost so much of his power. But then it says that he was made to lift up on his back legs, to stand up like a man. And it says that a man's heart or a man's mind was given to it. This is to remind us of the restoration and impeding salvation of King Nebuchadnezzar at the end of his life. Now the second beast comes along, and it's a bear. And it's a bear that is standing taller on one side with 3 ribs in his mouth. And we think of a bear is bigger than a lion, but not as majestic. But a bear is an astonishing, powerful, and brutal creature. This symbolizes the Medo-Persian kingdom, where Darius took over. The Medo-Persian kingdom, they were a huge kingdom, and they would send out millions of people into war. Hence this beast is so big, so large. And some commentators have said that it sort of it's slanted a little bit, because this was to try and symbolize the imbalance in the Medo-Persian Empire, where the Persians were more dominant than the Medes. And we'll see later on, even in chapter 8, that there is a certain similarity there. I'm not going into that, and Marie's will do that. But you see that there's this difference, and it's because the kingdom is imbalanced. The ribs in the mouth. What are the ribs in the mouth? There's 3. What's the ribs in the mouth of a bear? Just means he finished his meal. He just went to McDonald's and got a bit of a meal. No, it just means that probably, as many commentators have said, it could symbolize the 3 great nations that the Medo-Persians have destroyed, which would have been namely Lydia in 546 BC, Babylon in 539 BC, and Egypt in 525 BC. They destroyed those 3 great nations, and the bear had 3 ribs in his mouth. And now we get on to the third beast, a leopard with 4 wings. I mean, a leopard is already quick enough. It's one of the quickest animals on earth. Not the quickest, but one of the quickest on earth. A leopard is a really, really fast creature. And now you give it 4 wings, and it's a really swift creature. It's really fast creature. This is a very fitting image for the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, historians say, was astonishingly fast and swift in his conquering of most of the known world within only, who's good at history? How many years? How many years did it take him? You can count them in your hands. 10. 10 years, that's all it took for Alexander the Great to conquer most of the known world to them. 10 years. That's how fast, how astonishingly fast and swift he was. When it gets to the 4 heads, liberal commentators shy away. And the reason why they shy away is because this would get them into trouble, because they can't accept prophecy. But here's one thing. Was Daniel a superly intelligent, political, knowledgeable guy of his time? Maybe, maybe not. He certainly wasn't the CIA or the FBI of his time. But even if he was good at knowing about political power, he would have been able to see, the Medo-Persians are about to come into power, they're rising up, they're probably taking over, so I can write down, I had a vision that there's a beast taking over, it's the Medo-Persian. But there is no way on earth he would have known 200 years in advance that the Greeks would have come into power with a swiftness like a leopard, with 4 wings on its back, and take over the world in only 10 short years. Alexander the Great died at the age of 33 of alcoholism. And he left his kingdom not to a heir because he had none. He left it to who? To 4 generals. Hence the reason why liberal commentators have a bit of a problem and shy away from talking about 4 heads. 4 heads, 4 generals that took over. This would mean to them that they would have to say that yes, there was 200 years before it happened. Not only did Daniel prophesy that the Greeks would take over the world so fast, he put 4 heads because that kingdom was then headed by 4 people after Alexander the Great died. But might I tell you that this wasn't Daniel. This wasn't Daniel saying about himself. It was God revealing to Daniel. And God knows the past and God knows the future. Throughout the whole time we see these beasts. We see that dominion was given to the bear. Dominion was given to the leopard. That the lion was made to stand. In everything, God is sovereign over everything, times, peoples, languages, no matter what. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He knows the past and He knows the future. And now comes the last and most dreadful beast. It says that this beast is so dreadful, you can't even compare it to anything. It has iron teeth, and it devours, it breaks into pieces, and then stamps on what he eats. What a fitting image for the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was the next great power that came along. And it was pretty much a dreadful beast that dominated the world for 1,000 years. But it had this image of 10 horns. And this is where it gets really funky. And this is where most of the crazy interpretations of Daniel come from. It's the horns. It's the horn and the little horn. Who do we compare it to? What is it? And you ask yourself, what are the horns? What's the little horn? What's this all about? We're in Jungle Book, and now we've got horns with eyes. I'm lost. Well, you're not the only one. You're not the only one because, Daniel actually says in verses 15 and 16, he was troubled and he was anxious. I mean, the man himself was like, what's this all about? I mean, Daniel verse 21 says, I looked, and this horn made war on the saints and prevailed against them. Oh. And then in verses 23 to 26 it says, and the 4th beast, and I loved how the reading was enacted by Daniel, and we had Marcus the angel. Because here's the angel interpreting, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom. Norman. I haven't had enough coffee. Saying that, here goes one.
Sorry about it.
I just... Don't worry, I'm fine. And he says that the 4th kingdom is the 4th beast is a 4th kingdom. As for the horns, out of this kingdom shall arise 10 kings. So he doesn't give you any space for thought. There's going to be 10 kings out of this last kingdom. And we're talking about this little horn. And this little horn is what it's popularly known as... I don't even want to say the word because you're going to start having crazy images in your head. What is this little horn? The Antichrist. And now everyone's got their minds with some guy with 666 tattooed in his head and walking around with a devil's tail and etc. Let me tell you this much. It says that out of these 10 kings, one shall arise 3 will fall down and he will take over the world. He's not going to take over the world with 666 tattooed in his head. Might I submit to you that this man that will stand up will be a winner in the world's eyes. He will be an amazing leader. My translation of the Bible says that he was speaking great things. Other translation says pompous words or blasphemous words. But in the eyes of the world, this man is going to be a winner. And the fact that you are not in favor of him just makes you stupid and a fool. Don't be misunderstanding this and thinking that this is what some movies have shown, that everyone's going to be able to say, that's the Antichrist. No, it's not. Because the Bible says that the Antichrist will fool everyone, if possible, even the elect. Even the children of God, he will make them fools. So therefore, know this Antichrist that will come out of this fourth kingdom, he's not going to be scary. He's going to be very pleasing. But this now takes us into a bit of a problem. Okay? But the Roman Empire is long gone. How is this going to happen? This is why some commentators have suggested that there may be a revived Roman Empire. But it doesn't need to be a revived Roman Empire. Do you know why? What was the Roman Empire all about? And where is the Roman Empire more or less situated nowadays? Everything that the Romans have conquered is most of what you know nowadays as modern Europe. So there is a possibility that out of all of this huge piece of land called Europe, the 10 kings and presidents, doesn't matter. In their days was kings, nowadays we have presidents, vice presidents, whatever, might rise up, and one rise up in their midst. And when all things are falling to pieces, this man is going to come and save all the political power, all the world, and solve everyone's problems. And everyone's going to be just so amazed that he's such a great person. He wants the good of everyone. He will try and give money to the poor, and he's going to try and give jobs to everyone who's losing it. They will just look at him and say, finally we have a president that is good. But rest assured, the Bible says quite clear, if this is really the Antichrist, he will be fully possessed by the devil. And he will make war against the saints. And now we move to the last two things in this chapter. Because I jumped, and in between this explanation of these horns, there were two people. Two more important characters in this story, this vision. And I want you to forget about the beasts. I want you to forget about the horns, the little horn, and everything that the little horn will do. Because these two characters are the main central point of this vision. And the first one is in verses 9 and 10. And it says, and I looked, the thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, his hair was like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire came out of it. Thousands of thousands served them, and 10,000 times 10,000 sat in the court. And the court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. Who is this Ancient of Days? This is God himself, glorious in power, sitting on his throne, and everyone is in his presence, and everyone is sat in the court, and the court is sat in judgment. This is the judgment day. And we read about fire, and I just want to make a little bit of an aside. When you say, I want the fire of God, Think very well, because most of the time that the Bible talks about the fire of God, it's talking about His judgment. And many times we use the fire of God just by saying we want more of the Spirit of God. Just say we want more of the Spirit of God, because you may very well be asking God to give you more of His judgment. Do you really want that? Think twice. Be careful. Careful what you wish for. You might just get it. And it says that He is splendorous. He's marvelous. Daniel is in awe looking at God. I can only imagine this amazing picture. Looking at God in His throne. And then comes one. I saw in the night visions, and behold, in the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man. He came to the Ancient of Days, and to Him was given dominion and glory and kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve Him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. Daniel looks and he says, behold, here comes one like a son of man. He says it like. He doesn't say a son of man. He says like a son of man. He comes to the Most High. This Son of Man is given dominion. It says here that His dominion is an everlasting dominion. This dominion only belongs to God Himself. And it says that He will be served. The word here is pelach, which means to worship, to adore. Only God deserves worship. And this is why the Old Testament Jews knew and interpreted this passage as being the Messiah. God's anointed one. God Himself come into human history to be a king and to set up His kingdom. Son of Man occurs more or less 81 times in the Greek New Testament. All of them are talking about Jesus. This is Jesus' favorite title of Himself. Look at Jesus in Mark 14:61 and 62. He says, and He remained silent with no answer. And the high priest asked, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Jesus talks about what? Daniel 7, right here, where it says, and I saw one coming with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man. He applied son of man to Him. This is why the priest tore his clothes and said that Jesus was blaspheming, because Jesus was claiming to be God. And guess what? Jesus wasn't blaspheming. Jesus is God. Jesus came down to the earth. He lived a sinless life. He died the death on the cross, and He rose again on the third day, and He's going to come again in the clouds of heaven, and His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom that no one will ever destroy, and it's going to be forever and ever and ever, and everyone's going to serve Him.
Amen.
And I conclude with Isaiah 55:11. So shall my word that comes out of my mouth, it shall not return to me empty. It shall accomplish that which I purpose, and it shall succeed in the thing I've sent it. We can live in confidence that the parts that have not yet been fulfilled of this prophecy, the same way God spoke to Daniel 200 years before the Greeks even happened, it came to pass. If you are despairing because it hasn't yet come to pass, the Ancient of Days has not yet come in judgment, we haven't yet seen Jesus, put this in your heart. What God has said that's going to happen, if it happened in the past, it will happen again. You can live in confidence. The whole point of this message I want you to take home, live with confidence that God is going to do it. As many have said, and I'll repeat it, what a person believes will dictate how that person lives. What do you believe? That's a question I'll leave you to go home. God bless you.